The sun was hanging low over the sleepy cul-de-sac of Bridlewood Meadows, a neighborhood so quiet you could hear the wind brushing over sprinkler heads and the low hum of a lawnmower 3 blocks away. It was one of those suburban Saturdays where the biggest danger was forgetting to flip the burgers in time. Or so everyone thought. Cassandra Reese stood on her porch, sipping lemonade that had long gone watery. Her 6-year-old son, Ethan, sat at the edge of the driveway, tongue out in focused concentration as he sketched a fire-breathing dragon across the pavement with blue and green sidewalk chalk. His tiny fingers smudged with color, his shorts dirted with childhood joy. For a single moment, everything was still safe, ordinary, and American. Then the black SUV pulled in. No sound, no screeching tires. Just a slow, deliberate stop in front of their house. Cassandra's stomach dropped. It wasn't a neighbor's car. Not from this block. The windows were tinted pitch black, the kind of shade only seen on government convoys or those who wanted to look like they were. No plates. No markings. Just a hulking metal presence idling like a panther on the curb. 2 men stepped out. They wore matching dark navy uniforms, crisp and well-fitted, but off. Too tactical. Too serious. Patches stitched onto their chests read simply, HOA Enforcement Unit. No badge. No city emblem. Just the kind of cheap embroidery you could get overnight online. Their mirrored sunglasses reflected the sunshine, but nothing else about them gleamed. The taller one had a clipboard and a buzz cut. He stood like a man used to barking orders. The other, lean and twitchy, scanned the yard with too much intensity. Then his eyes locked on Ethan. Cassandra's breath hitched. Sidewalk defacement, the tall one announced, striding toward the driveway. This is a code violation. Cassandra blinked, confused. Excuse me. Per HOA policy, he continued without making eye contact. Unauthorized markings on shared pavement constitute defacement. This is a citable offense. Before she could respond, the wiry one crouched low and grabbed Ethan by the wrist. We're taking him in for questioning with HOA security, he said, calm like he was reading from a script. Ethan gasped in surprise, not pain, just the stunned confusion of a child being yanked out of his Saturday dream. Time fractured. Cassandra dropped her glass. It shattered. She lunged forward, shoving the man's hand off her son. Don't you dare touch my child. The tall one stepped between them, hand hovering near something at his belt. Empty holster? Flashlight? Stun gun? Cassandra couldn't tell. Ma'am, step back. We are authorized by the Bridlewood HOA Subcommittee for Compliance. No, you're not. A new voice boomed from the side. It didn't come from inside the house. It came from next door. A man walked across the lawn, slow and certain. He was tall, built like a wall, in his late 50s but walked like a Marine on patrol. His name was Grady Morales, and he was Cassandra's neighbor. Widower. Retired Army Ranger. Owner of 3 dogs and a grill the size of a coffin. He wore a faded 2nd Battalion t-shirt and jeans stained with motor oil. But none of that mattered as much as the look in his eyes, cold, locked in, utterly dangerous. I'd let go of the kid, Grady said, tone calm as death. Last warning. The wiry one faltered. The taller man puffed his chest. This doesn't concern you, sir. We're operating under HOA authority. Grady took another step. You're impersonating law enforcement, he said, which is a felony. And you're laying hands on a minor. That's attempted kidnapping. He pulled out his phone and hit record. The tall one's voice cracked. We have clearance. Then show us, Cassandra snapped, her voice sharp now. Badge. ID. HOA paperwork. Anything. Nothing. That's when it happened. The twitchy one panicked. He yanked Ethan harder, trying to bolt for the SUV with the kid in tow. Ethan screamed. Grady didn't run. He launched. One fluid motion. Like muscle memory carved from years in war zones. He collided with the man mid-turn, driving his shoulder into the attacker's chest. The man flew backward, crashing onto the pavement with a crack that silenced the entire neighborhood. Somewhere, a dog started barking. Sprinklers stuttered to a stop. The tall one turned, stunned. He shouldn't have. Grady was already moving, grabbing the man by the wrist, spinning him in a blur, and slamming him face first against the SUV. The metal groaned. The man groaned louder. You want to keep pretending you're cops? Grady growled, pinning the man effortlessly. Because I've trained real ones, and you two don't even come close. Phones were out. Neighbors had emerged. Someone shouted, call the police, but the sirens were already coming. 2 squad cars tore around the corner within moments. Real cops. Real badges. Real backup. Step away from him, one shouted. Grady raised his hands and backed off immediately, pointing to Cassandra and Ethan. They tried to take him. Cassandra choked out. They just grabbed him, like he was property. The cops descended fast. The twitchy one was still dazed, mumbling nonsense. The tall one whimpered as the officer cuffed him. IDs were demanded. None were valid. The patches? Bought online. The SUV? A rental. Their story? Collapsing. The footage spread like wildfire. What came out next was even worse. These men had hit 5 other neighborhoods, each time targeting families with children or elderly relatives, issuing fake fines, threats, and in some cases, attempting forced removal under fake HOA protocols. A small-time extortion ring hiding under the mask of suburban order. But not this time. Not in Bridlewood. Not on Grady Morales' watch. The police stayed for hours. Crime scene tape cordoned off the entire cul-de-sac. The SUV was towed. Neighbors buzzed in clusters like bees around a kicked hive. Half the block had footage. One woman across the street claimed she caught the entire tackle in slow motion with her new iPhone. A teenager live-streamed the whole thing to TikTok. Within 20 minutes, #HOAFakeCops was trending locally. Cassandra sat on the porch steps, arms wrapped around Ethan, his head buried in her shoulder. He'd stopped crying, but every so often he'd glance at the chalk dragon, still half-finished, and whisper, "Why did they try to take me, Mama?" She didn't have an answer. Grady Morales stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching everything. Not speaking, not pacing, just standing. He hadn't left her side once since the takedown. Detective Ramona Grant, a sturdy woman with a voice like gravel and patience to match, knelt beside Cassandra. "We've got your son's statement," she said gently. "He was very brave." Cassandra nodded. "Will he be okay?" "He's safe now. That's what matters." She stood, glancing toward the SUV where evidence techs were still digging through the glove box. "But I won't lie to you. This is bigger than a one-off stunt. We've seen signs of this crew before. But this is the first time someone fought back." Grady let out a quiet grunt. Someone had to. 2 hours later, the story hit the local news. By nightfall, it was on national media. A grainy still frame of Grady mid-tackle. Ethan's crying face blurred in the corner. Cassandra's outstretched hand frozen mid-lunge. The anchor's voice dubbed over the footage. Tonight, in Bridlewood Meadows, a retired Army Ranger stopped what could have been a kidnapping. The suspects posed as HOA enforcers in an attempt to abduct a 6-year-old boy. Charges are pending. The community is in shock. That night, Cassandra couldn't sleep. Ethan had finally drifted off beside her in bed, clutching a stuffed velociraptor. The house was dark, quiet, but her mind replayed every second, especially the silence when they demanded ID and had none. That was the moment she knew. These weren't men trying to find her. These were men prepared to disappear with her child. She rose, careful not to wake Ethan, and stepped out onto the porch. A low breeze carried the smell of summer grass and grilling meat still lingering in the air. Bridlewood looked normal again, but something beneath it had changed. Grady sat in a folding chair 2 doors down, feet propped up on a cooler, holding a beer he hadn't opened. "You ever sleep?" she asked. He shrugged. "Combat zones don't teach you great habits." She sat beside him. For a minute, neither spoke. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think HOA rules were just annoying. Fines for fences. Trash cans. Mailboxes being the wrong shade of beige. But this was something else." "They know people are used to compliance," Grady said. "That's what makes HOA impersonation so dangerous. People don't question uniforms, especially in neighborhoods built on control." She nodded, then looked down at her hands. "What if I hadn't been outside? What if Ethan had been playing around the corner? I would have never known until he was gone." Grady didn't say anything for a while. Then finally, "That's why you fight. Even when it doesn't make sense. Even when you're not sure you'll win." The next morning, an unmarked sedan rolled up to her driveway. 2 sharp-dressed agents stepped out, badges from the Department of Justice's Fraud and Public Corruption Task Force. Apparently, her case had triggered something deeper. "We've been watching this ring for months," one said. "They use a fake HOA compliance front to pressure residents. Mostly elderly or families like yours. They show up in uniform, issue citations, collect cash fines, or worse. The end goal isn't always money. Sometimes it's leverage." "Leverage?" she repeated. "Yes. In one case, they pushed a woman into signing over part of her property to settle an HOA violation. It was later used to access private utility records for a phishing scam." Cassandra blinked. "You're saying this is organized crime?" "Exactly. Small scale, but growing. and you just blew a hole in their operation. By midweek, more victims came forward. A Facebook group started, Families Against Fake HOA, and it exploded with stories from Tennessee to Arizona of similar incidents. Men in cheap uniforms, fake citations, threats, even break-ins. Grady's video, clearest of all, was used in an FBI briefing. The two arrested men were named. Ryan Dorsey, 37, former rent-a-cop fired for misconduct. Mitchell Blake, 29, had outstanding warrants for impersonating an officer in 2 other states. But there were more. A suspected network, perhaps a dozen in total, coordinated through burner phones and encrypted chats. The FBI was now hunting the rest. At the next Bridalwood HOA meeting, Cassandra stood in front of the board. "I'm not here to blame the HOA," she began, "but I am asking that we do better. No more ambiguous uniforms. No more private enforcement contractors. No more giving strangers power over our community." Some clapped, some scowled. But the president, an older man with a guilty flush on his cheeks, simply said, "We'll review everything." Outside the meeting hall, a local reporter asked for a quote. Cassandra glanced down at her phone, still set as her lock screen was Ethan's dragon, now painted permanently into their driveway. "Tell them," she said, "we're not scared of uniforms anymore." 3 weeks passed. The news vans were gone. The viral hashtag slowed. The dragon on the driveway had begun to fade under the pressure of sprinklers and scooter wheels. But the fear lingered like smoke after a house fire. Unseen, but choking. Cassandra tried to hold on to normalcy. She drove Ethan to school, smiled at neighbors, brought cookies to the neighborhood potluck. But every time a dark vehicle rolled by, her heart flipped. The Department of Justice had offered her a temporary protective order, just in case. But it was Grady Morales who remained the true guardian, quietly patrolling the block, not as a vigilante, but as a man who had seen too many things in foreign deserts to let chaos bloom in his backyard. Then came the letter, folded crisp and stamped with a gold-foiled insignia of the National Homeowners Compliance Council, a name neither Cassandra nor Grady had ever heard of. Inside was a single-page memo. "To whom it may concern, your recent involvement in obstructing an authorized field inspection conducted by HOA enforcement personnel is under review. Continued interference may result in fines, civil litigation, or removal of privileges associated with Bridalwood community membership." Cassandra read it twice. This can't be real," she muttered. Grady looked over the letter, then pulled out his phone. 2 minutes later, he confirmed it. The NHCC was a shell. An entity formed less than a year ago. Registered in Delaware. No physical office. No leadership names listed publicly. It was a legal ghost. "They're trying to rebrand," Grady said flatly. "New name. Same scam. Only now they're hiding behind legal threats instead of cheap uniforms." That evening, Grady made a call, not to the police, but to someone in his old network. 2 days later, a man in a rumpled suit with a Texas drawl and a badge from the office of the Inspector General knocked on Cassandra's door. "I heard your streets become ground zero for some HOA copycats," he said. "Mind if I take a look at that letter?" Cassandra handed it over. By week's end, the investigation ballooned. It turned out that the NHCC wasn't just fake. It was a legal front for laundering proceeds from the HOA extortion schemes. Fines paid in cash were being routed through shell entities, used to buy property liens, and even small land parcels, then flipped for profit under the guise of community redevelopment. It wasn't just impersonation anymore. It was organized racketeering. The task force called it Operation False Authority, and it all started in Bridalwood. But not everyone appreciated the spotlight. At the next HOA assembly, the boardroom was packed, not with homeowners, but lawyers. HOA's legal counsel, a stone-faced woman in a tailored navy suit, stood at the front flanked by a security detail that felt more like corporate muscle than community reps. She addressed the room with a chilling clarity. Due to the national attention, the Bridalwood Meadows Homeowners Association is now under a protective restructuring order. Effective immediately, all homeowners will adhere strictly to internal compliance protocols. Failure to do so may be interpreted as interference with ongoing legal proceedings. Cassandra stood. "Are you punishing us for uncovering fraud?" The lawyer smiled thinly. "We are protecting the integrity of the HOA." That night, an anonymous memo was slid under Cassandra's front door. Typed. No signature. Just a message. Not all enemies wear uniforms. Some write the rules. She showed it to Grady. He read it once, then folded it neatly. They're scared. That's good. What do? We make them more scared. The next week, Grady activated what he called the network. It wasn't official. It wasn't legal. But it was effective. A group of retired veterans, cybersecurity pros, lawyers, and former feds, quiet neighbors who'd once lived loud lives. They started organizing behind the scenes, cross-checking records, tracking property ownership transfers, digging into HOA voting logs, mapping the pattern of extortion from coast to coast. They found names, bank accounts, dummy companies. They weren't just going after the guys in fake uniforms now. They were chasing the architects. And one of them was on Bridalwood's current HOA board. An older man named Russell Markham, with white hair, a polished smile, and a history of consulting with HOA startups across the country. He had previously chaired 2 associations in Florida and Nevada, both of which had faced class action lawsuits for fraudulent citations and illegal evictions. He had survived those cases through legal loopholes. But this time, he'd messed with the wrong neighborhood. Cassandra brought the findings to the DOJ, along with video interviews from 3 other Bridalwood residents who had received citations from Russell's HOA Compliance Initiative, a name that no official record within the HOA could verify. The federal agents took it seriously. By the end of the month, Russell was served with a federal subpoena. But before he could be taken in, he disappeared. His house vacated. Bank accounts drained. His vehicle abandoned in a long-term parking garage at Dulles International Airport. Gone. Cassandra stood at her mailbox that morning, staring at the empty house across the street, the blinds still swaying from where agents had torn them open. She felt no victory, only an itch behind her ribs, a sense that something bigger had just slipped through their fingers. Grady approached with a folded newspaper under his arm. Front page, HOA fraud ring spans 6 states. Bridalwood family sparked federal manhunt. They'll rebuild, Cassandra said quietly. They'll try again. Different name. Different state. Grady nodded. Then we make sure they remember this one didn't end quietly. He handed her the paper. Page 7. She flipped it. A photo of Ethan, smiling with chalk-stained hands, beneath a new headline. Dragon Boy sparks national reform. Congress reviews new HOA regulation bill. Cassandra smiled for the first time in weeks. Not all victories came in handcuffs. Some came in chalk. It happened on a Tuesday. A warm, humid morning thick with the smell of cut grass and something faintly metallic in the air, like blood or rust. Cassandra was organizing Ethan's lunch when the doorbell rang. Not once, but 3 times in sharp succession. Grady was already outside. He stood near the sidewalk, his posture rigid, gaze fixed on the street. A black sedan had parked at the curb. Different from before. This one was older, dusty, and unremarkable. It looked like it had crossed a desert to get here. The license plate was from Colorado. And inside, sitting calmly in the driver's seat, was Russell Markham. Alive. And smiling. Cassandra felt her stomach drop. She stepped out cautiously, shielding Ethan who had followed close behind. Back inside, Grady ordered without looking at her. Now. Russell stepped out of the car slowly, like he had all the time in the world. He wore the same kind of sport coat he always had, but now it hung looser, like he'd lost weight, or maybe just power. Still, there was something slick about him, something untouched. I'm not here to make trouble, he said smoothly, raising his hands. I came to talk. Grady didn't respond. Cassandra moved Ethan back into the house, locked the door, and watched through the front window as Grady approached. This isn't your street anymore, Grady said. Russell chuckled. It never was. That's the problem. You're a fugitive. And yet, here I am. Behind her, Cassandra grabbed her phone and hit record. She'd learned by now, record everything. Russell looked toward the house. I'm not the monster you think I am. You're chasing shadows. HOA schemes, fake badges, paper threats, they were never mine. They were tools. Tools I lent out to keep certain wheels turning. Grady tilted his head. You confessing something? Russell leaned against the car. Confession's such a religious word. Let's call it a warning. He reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out a folded document, sealed in a plastic sleeve, and dropped it on the sidewalk. Then, just as calmly, he turned and drove away. No police. No confrontation. Just gone, like smoke. The document was worse than they imagined. A confidential internal memo from a lobbying firm based in Washington, D.C., not addressed to Russell, but bearing his initials and timestamped 6 months before the Bridalwood incident. Inside were strategy notes. Names. HOA restructuring models designed not for neighborhood improvement, but for property acquisition by proxy. Legalese cloaked a brutal reality. Exploit underfunded HOA boards, place insiders through election loopholes, and systematically impose fines to bankrupt vulnerable homeowners. The final step? Offer to purchase the defaulted property through a shell company and flip it to real estate developers. It wasn't just fraud. It was calculated, legislated theft. They weren't running from the law. They were trying to stay ahead of it. Cassandra handed the memo over to the DOJ within the hour. But the mood in Bridlewood changed. This wasn't a neighborhood scandal anymore. This was national. Corruption had bled into city councils, lobbying firms, real estate trusts. The HOA was just a front. The problem was bigger than anyone had guessed. The final straw came days later. A letter from the county arrived, addressed to every homeowner in Bridlewood. For zoning reclassification and HOA amendment filings, the property adjacent to lots 104 to 110, including Ms. Reese's residence, has been approved for commercial redevelopment under the oversight of Northridge Holdings. The catch? Northridge Holdings was one of the shell companies listed in the memo. Russell had made his move even in absence. Cassandra called an emergency meeting. Not with the HOA, not with lawyers, but with everyone. The entire neighborhood gathered in the community park that Friday night. Grady spoke first, followed by two teachers, a nurse, a retired judge, and finally, Cassandra. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply held up the memo and said, "This is what they think we're worth. Our homes, our children, our futures, paperwork and loopholes." Then she made the pitch. It wasn't just about fighting Russell or blocking Northridge. It was about reclaiming control. A new organization would be formed, the Bridlewood Alliance, a homeowners coalition independent of the old HOA, rooted in transparency, funded by voluntary contributions, and legally recognized as a voting bloc that could challenge any development proposal in court. And the neighborhood agreed unanimously. That same night, Cassandra received a call from a contact in the state attorney general's office. The DOJ had partnered with state authorities to launch a formal investigation into HOA abuse across 6 counties, using Bridlewood as the pilot case. And Cassandra was invited to testify before the Subcommittee on Housing and Urban Development in Washington. Grady drove her to the airport himself. As they stood beside the security checkpoint, he offered her a small object wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it. Inside was a bronze pin shaped like a dragon. "For Ethan," Grady said. "And for you. You made the fire. Now make it count." 3 days later, Cassandra stood in front of a panel of senators and cameras. Behind her sat lawyers, victims, activists. Before her sat lawmakers with pins, mics, and tired eyes. "My name is Cassandra Reese," she began. "I'm a mother, a homeowner. And 3 weeks ago, I watched 2 men try to take my child in broad daylight under the name of a system we trusted." She held up the memo. "This is what the system became. And we let it. Because we were too busy, too afraid, too polite." She paused, looked up, but not anymore. They called it the Dragon Law. The bill had a longer official name, something forgettable and buried under legal lingo about residential protection and HOA reform. But to the public, to the press, and to every parent who watched Cassandra Reese's trembling voice echo through that congressional chamber, it was the Dragon Law, named after a child's chalk drawing turned symbol of resistance. Within 72 hours, the story went global. Mother stops HOA impersonators. Now taking on Congress. The House that fought back. From sidewalk chalk to Senate hearings. Morning shows asked for interviews. Think tanks invited her to panels. A documentary offer came in from Netflix within 10 days. But Cassandra didn't care about the noise. She only cared about the vote. When the bill passed its subcommittee phase, it wasn't just paperwork. It was fire. It was fuel. It triggered a cascade of audits across the country. Over 40 homeowners associations were placed under emergency review. 4 shell companies linked to Northridge Holdings were frozen. Federal subpoenas rained down like thunder on anyone who had touched fraudulent citations in the last 5 years. The Bridlewood Alliance wasn't just a local group anymore. It became the model. Cities like Charlotte, Phoenix, and Sacramento launched their own. A senator proposed a nationwide homeowner oversight platform. But even as victories piled up, something still bothered Cassandra. Russell Markham was still missing. His face had appeared on every most wanted news brief. His name floated through federal watch lists. Interpol tagged him at a Panamanian airport. False alarm. Then a blurry security photo popped up in Iceland. Another dead end. He was a ghost. Until he wasn't. It happened in a courthouse in Harris County, Texas. During a routine property seizure hearing related to the North Ridge investigations, a witness was called forward, a former financial contractor who had been quietly flipping land under fake development grants. The man entered the courtroom in a cheap suit, graying hair pulled back, posture slouched. Cassandra, present as a public observer, sat 3 rows from the front. She didn't recognize him at first, until he turned. The eyes were the same. Cold. Calculating. Russell. He had changed everything. Name, face, posture, accent. But not the eyes. Those eyes had stared across her street months ago. They had warned her. Grady had always said, "Predators don't change. They adapt." And Russell had adapted. Under oath, he gave nothing. Pleaded the fifth. His new alias, Daniel Carr, was thinly veiled. But the DOJ had enough. By nightfall, he was in custody. And this time, there would be no escape. The paper trail was too long. The memo too damning. And the cameras? Already rolling. Cassandra didn't celebrate. She went home. That night, she sat on her porch with Ethan. He was 7 now. Bigger. Bolder. But still loved dragons. "Is the bad guy gone?" he asked. She thought for a moment, then replied, "Yes. But the rules are still broken. So we fixed them." They sat in silence, watching the last golden streaks of sunlight vanish over Bridlewood's rooftops. 6 months later, the dragon law passed on the federal level. It banned unaudited citations from private enforcement agencies, mandated ID requirements and third-party arbitration for HOA fines, created a national registry for HOA boards, subject to open voting audits. And most importantly, it reclassified impersonation of neighborhood authority as a federal offense, punishable by up to 25 years in prison. Russell's trial was set for the fall. Rumor had it he was ready to flip, name others. A conspiracy larger than anyone expected was about to unravel. But that wasn't Cassandra's story anymore. She'd done her part. The fight began with a driveway. With chalk. With a dragon. And though dragons may fade with rain and time, their fire, once lit, is not easily forgotten.